पॉलिसी बाजार पर 1 करोड़ रुपए का टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस केवल 450 रुपए महीने से शुरू। वाव!
Well, it's been a record period as far as civil aviation and domestic sector growth is concerned. We are now seeing rapid growth in this sector. In fact, the numbers are absolutely astounding. And the question that really needs to be looked at is that, is this just about pent-up demand because so many travelers weren't able to travel during the COVID period? Or is this really a resurgence of this sector? And going forward, what exactly does it mean? Very special guest with us, the Civil Aviation Minister, Jyotiraditya Scindia. Mr. Scindia, let's reflect first on the numbers. December 24th, 4.35 lakh domestic travelers. Is this because of pent-up demand, or do you believe that this is symbolic perhaps of growth in our economy as well?
Well, first of all, Vishnu, thank you very much for having me. Let me be very clear that I certainly believe that the civil aviation sector in India is heralded for new growth opportunities and growth that is going to be sequential and permanent. The civil aviation sector in the last, if you take out the COVID years, has experienced close to about 10.6% growth. And the surprising factor in this is that growth has really not come from what you and I normally emphasize with the civil aviation sector, which is the tier 1 cities and such, but really tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Right. Because tier 1 city growth has been close to about 5.9%, but tier 2 and tier 3 city growth has been almost 35% on a CAGR basis. So that's where the growth potential is coming from. If you look at the numbers, and these are really reassuring numbers, not necessarily a data point, which is December 24th, right, which by itself is a new record. Our record prior to
year on year it's been.
Yeah, prior to COVID was about 4.2,
yeah,
and we've broken that multiple times in the last 10 days,
right,
and the record in the last 10 days has been broken again on the 24th of December at 4.35. But that to me is not as, it is significant, but not as significant as if you look at the pro rata numbers of your bumper year, which was calendar year 2019,
right,
prior to COVID, where we had 144 million domestic flyers. And if you look at that on a pro rata basis, you're looking at roughly about 95 million up till November. And this year, up till November, we've already touched 111 million flyers, which means that you've experienced a growth of almost 15% in the 11 months of this year. And therefore, I see this year as being a new growth year for civil aviation.
Sure.
And that's really coming from two factors. One, of course, is a tremendous desire of people wanting to travel. And the second really is a huge growth in terms of the value proposition, in terms of airlines increasing their fleet size,
right,
as well as the number of airports growing.
So let's talk a little bit about a couple of these points. Infrastructure are we at a stage when, the infrastructure which we have, particularly in cities like Delhi or airports like Delhi, is at capacity, and in the immediate foreseeable future, that's going to be a problem. No matter how many more scanners or more CISF, because the growth has been so high that the infrastructure, at least for a period of time, is going to be at its maximum capacity. Is that a concern for you?
So 2 points in answer to you. Of course, growth brings along with it tremendous demands on infrastructure, and we've kept that in mind as we go along.
Right.
So if you look at airports such as Delhi, you have a capacity of close to 70 million today, going to go to close to about 100 million by mid next year. You're going to become one of the largest airports in the world,
right,
way beyond JFK and Atlanta and airports such as that. But you have also put in place a new facility in Jewar, which by 2024 will have a 12 million capacity, and in its fourth phase will have close to about 70 million.
Right.
So Delhi itself is going to grow from close to 70 million to 170 million over the next 6 to 7 years.
Right.
A similar situation in Bombay, which today is at max capacity roughly about 60 million, but you're building out a new airport now in Navi Mumbai.
Right.
Bangalore has increased its capacity from almost 26 million to 55 million with the new terminal, which will start in early Jan. Mm-hmm. And similar story for you in Chennai as well as Hyderabad and Kolkata. So if you look at the 6 metros in India, our innate capacity, which was roughly about 192 million, will grow to almost 420 million over the next 4 to 5 years.
Right.
So we are geared for that growth. The second point I want to make is that if you look at the spread of airports across the country, In India, we had roughly about 74 airports until 13-14.
Yeah.
In the last 8 years, we have built out close to about another 72 airports. So we're today at 146. And my target is that in the next 4 to 5 years, I would like to see this number cross 200.
Sure.
So that's the kind of, if you will, the breadth and the depth of infrastructure capacity that we're looking to have in place. The last point I want to make before you pose your next question is that the statement that you made, that irrespective of how many scanners we have in place and how many gates we have in place, is not very true. An airport is a very important conjunct between the demand that is created by the market and our population and the supply that is put in place by airlines. Now, it's a very important part of the cog of that value chain. And its primary responsibility is to make sure that the demand meets the supply.
Right.
For that, you need to do two things. And this is more of an operations exercise, which I had to do in the last month over successive meetings, where you need to put in capacity at the supply side based on the throughput capability of your airport. And if you have, and the problem is where? The problem is really in the peak hours, which is 0500 to 0900.
Right.
So if you're able to schedule the number of arrivals and departures depending on your throughput capability, and B, increase your throughput capability at the airport by putting in place those scanners and those security lines. So for example, in Delhi, we had only 11 plus 2 when I took my first meeting on the 7th of December. Today, on the 28th of December, we have close to about 21 in place.
Right.
So we almost doubled the capacity.
Right.
And now, if you go to the Delhi airport, there are no lines. So therefore, it's an operations exercise that has to be finessed. And that has been done in Delhi. We are in the process of doing that in Bombay and in Bangalore. And then those airports will be able to function at full capacity.
Sure. Let's talk about the state of our airlines. There has been a consolidation in the sector. There's an expanded Air India right now, Vistara, Air Asia. It's all part of the larger Air India group. But they are fairly okay as far as cash is concerned. Indigo is reasonably okay as far as cash is concerned. Many of the other airlines are not. Is that a cause of concern that you've got two large viable entities, but many of the smaller airlines are struggling in terms of cash reserves?
Well, I think it's been a very difficult time for airlines across the board in the world the last 3 years. And we're still not out of the woods. All our airlines are still making losses. But I do believe that as demand picks up, the economies of scale arguments comes in, fleet sizes grow, I think we'll be able to be over the hump. What I'm doing as a minister, it's not my job as civil aviation minister to look at the balance sheets of all airlines, because that's the responsibility of each airline entity in terms of the business environment in which it functions. But it certainly is my responsibility to provide as much as possible a playing field in which they can operate efficiently. And one of the first things that I did when I took charge as aviation minister and looked at the cost structure of airlines. And across the board in India, almost 50% of the cost structure of an airline is air turbine fuel.
Yes.
And states in India levy a VAT ranging from 1% to 30%
You
on
corrected
ATF.
that. But not,
And
all,
so we had-
not in all states.
So we had, so
BJP ruled states have seen this come down.
as opposed to saying, looking at what is left, I think it's important to understand the journey that we have progressed on in a short span of the last 17 months, and that too coming out of COVID. We had 12 states that had a range of VAT between 1 to 4% when I came in, and we had close to about 24 states that had a VAT prohibitive rate of close to 20 to 30%. Today, after 17 months of persuasion, folding hands, making them understand the Laffer curve argument of if you raise a lower level of taxes, revenues will rise, the fact that refueling will happen much more in states where tax levels are low. And I must, through your channel and through you, thank the 16 state governments across the board that have moved from a 20-30% VAT regime to a 1 to 4%. So we today have close to about 12 plus 16, 28 states that are in the 1 to 4% as opposed to 12, and we have only 8 states left in the prohibitive basket of 20 to 30% as opposed to 24 last year. So that huge metamorphosis change has happened. And many states have benefited from this in very, very early days. Let me give you the case of point of Srinagar in the UT of J&K, when they lowered VAT from 30% to 3% or 4%. Within 2 weeks, refueling levels went up by 360%.
Right.
And therefore, the economic argument then comes into place. Right. Connectivity has grown tremendously in Srinagar. So those are, and we have to understand, and state governments also have to understand that civil aviation is a precursor to economic growth.
Right.
And not the other way around, the mantra which used to be the other way around 20 years ago, that economic growth has to be the precursor for civil aviation. Where you have air connectivity is where you will see tourism, where you will see investment, where you will see economic growth, where you will see employment.
But let me ask you this. There's hyper competitiveness as well in the Indian civil aviation sector. Cutthroat fares. And that means...
That's good.
It is good. It's good for the consumer.
Absolutely.
But for the viability of the airlines going forward, the argument that the airlines raise is that aviation turbine fuel needs to come down more at the level of the center, perhaps include that in the GST as part of the entire GST.
So first, Vishnu, I'd like to give you a slightly deeper understanding of the issue, right? I think it's easy for you to scratch the surface and say GST. You have to understand, and I think you do understand, that the GST process is a very detailed process.
Yeah.
It is a consultative process between all states, which is what you have always asked for, which is what we have always asked for, that we must work together along with states. So therefore, what have I done? As opposed to holding one's ear from this side, I've tried to do it from this side, which is by lowering VAT on ATF across 16 states and bringing 28 states into that basket, you're already down to a level of 1 to 4% on VAT on ATF.
Right.
So when you move to a GST regime, it's not going to be lower than a 1 to 4%.
Sure.
Right? So that's the hard work that we've already put in place. Now, the important point to understand about ATF is that we import most of our ATF into India. 1. 2, there is volatility with regard to ATF. And I must, through your channel, again thank the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Mr. Hardeep Puri, for working along with us. There was great degree of volatility with regard to ATF pricing in the last 12 to 15 months. Generally, what we refer to as the crack, which is the volatility, the term used for volatility, between ATF pricing internationally and domestically was within a certain band. It went sky high through that band during the COVID period. We worked with the MOPNG and we worked out a price reference to the MOPAG, which is the base level, and we've worked with all the OMCs, oil marketing companies, to work out a volatility level of between 5 to 12% based on a MOPAG price, thereby curbing that volatility for airlines. So 2 things. 1, on the price for the raw material coming in, we've curbed the volatility and brought it down. 2, as far as tax levels on ATF, on VAT, we've brought 16 states onto the 1 to 4% level. So we've worked at both sides from the Civil Aviation Ministry along with the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and we have created that environment. Now, with regard to your comment on cutthroat competition, that's a factor that plays in the market between players. I do not think that you want a ministry which has deregulated this market to then again become a regulator. And therefore, the market has to play itself out. We've also seen, after 20 years, a new entrant entering the sector. This sector has been always known for companies that shut shop. You've got Akasa Air, which has started a new airline. They started with 2 planes. They have now very rapidly increased their fleet over the last 3 months to very, very high levels. They're also playing for customers in terms of giving them a value proposition with low prices. So therefore, it depends on every market player, the strategy that the market player assumes. And I do not think it is for government or the ministry to start interfering in the pricing mechanism, which may be to the advantage of customers on the one hand, and maybe a volume game for some players on the other hand.
Okay, 1 or 2 more small questions. I know you have to leave. Safety is perhaps the most important issue in any aspect of aviation. We've risen from 102 to 48. That's a considerable jump. When we see reports about various airlines and air safety issues, and we've obviously got a very large fleet size and it is continuing to grow, is that an area of concern that Are you satisfied with what our airlines are
So
doing?
first, let me say this, that we have two regulators in place in India. The first is a safety regulator, which is the DGCA. The second is a security regulator, which is BCAS.
Yeah.
For me, both those issues are paramount. Number one, safety. Number two, security. And there cannot be even a 1%, I do not even want to use the word compromise, but a leeway as far as those two issues are concerned. And I think the ministry and the government has pretty much shown that over the last year and a half in terms of its conduct. What is very reassuring for us is that ICAO, which is the nodal agency of civil aviation worldwide, has increased India's ranking from low 102 in 2018 to number 48 today. So we are among the principal countries of civil aviation in the world today, way ahead of many advanced countries in the area of civil aviation. We've jumped our percentage numbers from 69.95 in the last ranking percent to almost 86% across 8 parameters, of which 6 were judged this time around. So we've achieved, our safety regulator has achieved a lot in terms of processes and principles and its functioning, which has been certified today by ICAO. On the other hand, what we have done over the last year and a half is increased what is called within DGCA parlance our ASP, an annual surveillance plan. And our annual surveillance in 2019 was at roughly about 2,700, 800, all kinds of checks and processes. We've increased that in the budgeted area for 2022 to 3,719, and as of date, we have conducted almost 4,200. So we have put in place all the processes for surveillance. We've done random checks. We've moved our airlines from up on the value curve on camo audits, on ammo audits, the quality of engineers doing checking of flights before they are given the green signal at all airports have been increased from A level of engineers to B1, B2, which is a much higher level of engineering capability in the last 3 months. So we've put all of these policies in place in terms of ensuring that we look at safety in a very rigorous manner.
Last question to you. Domestic aviation is really growing. Would you like to see a lot more done in terms of international aviation from airlines out of India?
Absolutely.
Is that being done at the pace
I have the
that
ambition.
I mean, Air India obviously is going to acquire a lot of aircraft. What about other airlines?
I have the ambition.
Why do Middle Eastern airlines continue to dominate?
You're absolutely right, and I have the ambition. And I wondered to myself, why is it that we have not been able to create our own hub in India?
Right.
Why is India's hub either on our eastern neighbors or on our western neighbors?
Correct.
And I think it's important, and the time has come, because now today India has achieved those economies of scale, both in terms of fleet capability and in terms of desire of passengers and our citizens to travel abroad, to create that hub in India. And I'm working today as we speak with Delhi Airport as well as 2 or 3 airlines to look at a construct wherein we can create the first hub within India. I think it's important for that, and that's one of the things that I've been pursuing since I took over, that we need to get more wide-bodied aircraft, we need to go more long-haul, we need to do more direct routing, because if you do more direct routing, you or I as a customer or anyone else will prefer a direct flight rather than go via a hub, even though going via the hub may possibly be cheaper. And therefore, I'm very happy that our airlines, whether it's Air India, whether it's Indigo, whether it's SpiceJet, are now looking at wide-bodied aircraft, looking at long-haul flights, looking at point-to-point service. But what's happened, and this is again a situation internationally, is suddenly demand for aircrafts have gone sky high, and therefore manufacturers are not able to supply the planes to Vishnu or to anyone else. So what we have done within the Civil Aviation Ministry is that we have a wet lease clause, which used to be 3+3 earlier. I have now sat within our ministry, and we've increased that wet lease capability to 6+6. Thereby, that gives the leverage for airlines to go down the wet lease route in the interim for a year until they get their wide-bodied aircraft. And therefore, that's our job to be. I believe that my job in government and in this ministry, our job is to be a facilitator and not a regulator. And that's the attitude that we're working, because in airline success, in airport success lies our success and lies the country's success.
Jyotiraditya Scindia, thank you very much for speaking to us. The Civil Aviation Minister talking about various aspects from flight safety to aviation turbine fuel to growth in the sector, infrastructure as well. This is one of the most exciting sectors of India, of our economy. Going forward, millions more across our country stand to gain. It's a huge challenge, but hopefully the steps are being taken in the right direction.